Hurried.
Before Ayya starts with her talk, we have some very, very exciting news to share with everyone. And we just got this information yesterday morning. As you know, we've been attempting to be here, and certainly Ayya Brahmavara is in the running, but she wants to spend a couple of years with senior bhikkhunis before she settles down, and so we're a possible place for her to settle down. So I guess our practice for the next few years in regard to Ayya here is to practice equanimity and not the desire of pick me. Anyway, the happy news that has been confirmed as of yesterday is that Ayya Himsa, who's a Canadian nun from Vancouver, did part of her training with Ayya Nandi, and oops, you might be getting feedback with my computer. Maybe I'll run down and take it downstairs and hide it down there. Oh, you're giving your talk. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, Ayya Himsa will be coming as our resident nun probably around December 1st of this year. So we'll be a continuous instead of a now and then monastery, will be a continuous monastery. So that's our super happy news. And then we'll see in a few years that Ayya Brahmavara joins us up, but Ayya Brahmavara has offered to support us by coming back every year for a period of time of a year. And then, okay, I'm just going to go hide my computer so we don't get feedback. Thank you. Thank you.
Ayya Himsa is she trained at Sati Saranaya with Mohammed and Andy over in the other side of Canada. Currently living at Aloka Vihara, which is down in California. Ayya Ananda Bodhi and Ayya abbesses of that monastery, and she's going to have sort of more time for practice, more time for meditation practice, because Aloka Vihara is actually monastery, and she's very, very happy there. But it's just sometimes you just need to step back a little bit, if you can, and have some time to develop meditation. So that's really what she's hoping to do. And it's really thrilling, actually, that because there are many nuns who've expressed some interest in coming to Camel, but there are so many monasteries, not very many nuns, and this is the issue, really. So it's really wonderful news that she's coming here, and she wants to be here long term, and she has no plan to move on. It's just to be here, land, start practicing, see how it goes. So she's also a very fine teacher, and she's, I think, about 10 Vas now, so she's quite experienced bhikkhuni. And she's been doing some teaching, I think, here in the group before. I think she's on Zoom. She has, yeah. So her face might be familiar to you from her teachings in the past. So great. Okay. So I'll just start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassa.
Rama Chaloka Dipati Sahampati Katanjali Anadi Warang Ayachata Santida Sata Paraja Kajatika Dese tu Damang Anukampi Mam Pajang.
Thank you. Sagamita. It's usually the other way around, but never mind.
We're just getting our act together.
So, yeah, welcome everybody. And it's just so lovely to sit together. Wow, I find it really strengthening to be part of a community. And it's a real treat, a real treasure to step into a community like this that's already thriving, and to be able to be part of, a group of people who are really devoted to practice. And I know life's very full, life's very complicated, but we have this spiritual aspect to our lives, and that's something to really celebrate, to really make much of, and to be very, very grateful and glad for. And so we're blessed, aren't we? We've come in contact with some really extraordinary, let's say extraordinary. I think the Buddha was extraordinary. The teachings also are amazing. And they're also very much, I'd say, very practical, very down to earth, very common sense. And the Buddha said, these teachings are in some way very simple and also very profound. So we can step in to this path at any time, in any way, in any frame of mind, with any degree of understanding. We can step in and we can begin to practice. As our practice develops, we can recognize that there's more and more, in a way, depth, in a way, there's more and more to learn and to discover, both about the path and about this one here, this mind, this heart, this life. And so it's a rich, rich field. And sometimes there can be a danger of feeling a bit overwhelmed when you hear Dharma talks. I'm aware that sometimes one can talk in a way that people feel bombarded with information, and or maybe not quite understand, or maybe feel it's not totally relevant to me and what's going on for me right now. No worries. I think if you hear Dharma talks in this way, or online, picking out talks, or in any way at all, or pick up books on Dharma and start reading, and there's anything that doesn't resonate, doesn't make sense, doesn't work for you, well, that's fine. We can put these things aside and just keep open and keep seeking and ask questions. And we're all in different places, and we start from where we're at. And it's one step at a time. And there's always teachings, there's always answers in the Buddha Dhamma for us at any stage on the path. So how wonderful, and what great resources we have nowadays. I mean, I would say this is the golden age of Buddhism, actually. And we need it, don't we? We really need it at this time, because it's also the age of great chaos and huge change and great unpredictability, and particularly challenging. People have probably always said that about whatever time we live in. This is particularly challenging. But I think actually it really is very challenging these days for us. And so amidst all that confusion, you know, we're very, very blessed that there is the Buddha Dharma, and it's so accessible. It's so accessible, isn't it? I mean, it's everywhere. Mindfulness is mainstream, and there are so many Dharma teachers and teachings available with a click of a finger on the keyboard, sort of thing, for us to listen, for us to read, for us to visit. But we don't have to actually move from our armchair to receive the Dharma. So I think this is amazing and wonderful. And again, something to really celebrate. And I encourage all of us to keep accessing, you know, the sources of Dharma teachings, and keep pursuing the spiritual practice, and let it be a really significant part of our lives. Let it be even a priority for us, to help us to chart our course through this life that we have, this very precious life, this very precious opportunity. So yeah, yesterday we did a sutta study, and we were looking at the Kakachupama Sutta, which means the simile of the soul, and it's very, very powerful, and it stayed with me since our class yesterday. It's really essentially about how to deal with difficulties, how to deal with criticism, how to deal with people, yeah, saying or doing things that we find offensive, we find difficult. And we had a very interesting discussion, really all about relationships and how to work with others, you know, in relationship. And this is all very relevant for us. And I was considering that, and considering that the Buddha said, you know, whatever people say to us, however they treat us, we should have a mind that is unaffected, essentially, unshaken. And we should avoid blurting out any unskillful speech in response. And we should have a heart of loving kindness towards that person or that situation. And we should extend that heart of loving kindness based on that person or that situation, and extend it to all beings. This is how to deal with criticism, how to deal with even the most, you know, horrendous experiences. People coming along and harming us, people coming along and using violence against us. And so, yeah, it's a really powerful teaching, and I've been considering that, and considering the other side of it as well. How can I avoid creating any kind of difficulty for other people, you know? In a way, I would say, or we can say, looking at the laws of karma, you know, if somebody comes along and harms me, obviously that's challenging, that's difficult, it's terrible, but I know how to respond. I can take in the Buddha's teachings and do my very utmost not to create any more difficulty, not to react in a negative way, you know, do the best I can to restrain negative impulses and just try and get through the experience as best I can with a heart of loving kindness, which in and of itself, that's a big challenge, that's a powerful teaching and a powerful practice. But, you know, I'm not actually creating any more difficulty for myself. I'm not creating karma, in short. I'm not intending harm. Others may intend harm towards me, but that's not actually a problem for me ultimately, because I'm not creating any more suffering in the future for myself. It's intentional actions, speech and thoughts that create suffering for us, or happiness or well-being for us in the future, whether unskillful or skillful. It's our own volition that creates future for us. And so in a way, I'm more interested in not creating harm here. Our karma is such we can't really predict. We don't really know what's coming towards us from outside, as it were. But that's not our responsibility. In a way, we can't control that. So if someone comes along with a harmful intention, it's not they have a problem. They have, you know, one can feel compassion for someone who has an intention to harm. But what really matters is that we can actually work to reduce the suffering in this world, not to add to it. And so that's the bit I'm really interested in somehow. That's what I'm left with anyway. It's like, okay, I know how to work with criticism, and I know how to work with difficult experiences coming at me. How do I do my very best not to create that for others, that kind of challenge for others? How not to offend others, how not to cause harm towards others in any way. And this really leads to, you know, the Sila, doesn't it? You know, the aspects of the path that are relating to speech and action and also livelihood. So we have all the guidance that we need to help us, you know, to try and avoid adding to the suffering in this world. And then we can apply these teachings. And I think this really is the focus for energy and for mindfulness, simply because this is something we can actually have some, we have some agency here. We don't have agency when things come at us, but we do have agency when it comes to our responses and to the ways in which we manifest in the world. So I've been thinking about, I was thinking about the first part of the sutta where the Buddha is advising a monk to not respond to criticism with anger, with negativity, with actions that are harmful to others, and reflecting on how powerful words can be, what we say. Isn't it amazing how powerful a simple act of opening our mouths and saying words can actually be, and how an untimely comment or reactive speech when we're feeling angry or upset we can sometimes blurt out things that we don't really necessarily deeply mean, but just in that moment we can say something. And these kind of happenings, these experiences can have a huge impact on the other person, on another or others. You know, people can remember words that have almost been thrown out, upsetting statements, phrases, sentiments. And it's really interesting to me, it's pretty awful actually, how one can not really, you can say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, actually, I really don't mean it. But once the words have been spoken, there's no taking them back. And people will remember, sometimes for a very long time. And so this kind of power of speech, and of course there's the other side of that, which is that gentle speech, kind speech, timely speech, words of dharma, words of support, caring speech can also have a strong effect, a lasting effect, and a really good effect on others. So there are the two sides, of course. But just the power, the simple act of speaking has a resonance, and through time also can have can really lodge in the heart of another or others. And so yes, right speech, how to manage this capacity that we have to communicate, how to communicate skillfully. And it's a huge field, of course, but the Buddha did give guidance, and that guidance is quite simple, really. And it's in the precept, isn't it? The precept on speech. I will refrain from lying is the simplest translation of the precept. To refrain from dishonesty. I mean, that's really important, of course, to be honest. So maybe that really is the most important guideline for us. And it has many different kind of layers to it. There's outright lying, knowing that you're lying. But there are so many subtle aspects to that, aren't there? Tendency to exaggerate or understate, tendency to avoid speaking the truth. Sometimes when someone might infer something that's not true. And we can sort of recognize that it's really a delicate and quite challenging business to not mislead others, either through what we say or through what we don't say. There's a very interesting sutta in Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha says there are three kinds of people, three kinds of speech, really, in the world. And in terms of people, there are those whose speech is like dung, those whose speech is like flowers, and those whose speech is like honey. And the Buddha went on to explain that people whose speech is like dung are people who will resort to dishonest speech in order to gain for themselves, or to prevent themselves from getting into some kind of trouble, or even sometimes just to cause divisiveness, to cause disharmony for whatever reason. He said, these are people whose speech is like dung. And then those whose speech is like flowers, he said that these people will always be honest, even when it might lead to some sort of problems for themselves, even if it might cause some kind of disharmony, but they will actually nevertheless stay with what's true and avoid any kind of misleading others. Those whose speech is like flowers. And then the ones whose speech is like honey, the Buddha said these are people who are always honest, but who also have speech that is gentle and speech that is kind. Maybe it's okay. Christine's using the icons. It was turned off a little bit. Yeah, it stopped now. So the speech like honey, it's agreeable, it's gentle, and it's pleasing to the ears of the listeners. These are people whose speech is like honey. So yeah, how to have speech like honey, and certainly like flowers, and avoid speech that is like dung. And I think it's not so difficult for us to discern, actually. And to, yeah, really, when we're considering right speech, to first of all, really be quite sure to keep it honest, keep it true, always trying to speak from the heart, in truth. It's not actually always easy, I find, but it's very easy to know the difference between sincere and genuine and authentic speech and that which is not. I see that as a work in progress for most of us, because actually we have to know ourselves quite well in order to have speech that is really genuine, that's really, you know, if one is deluding oneself in any way, then we might recognize that can come out in our speech. And so actually also the way we speak tells us so much about ourselves, doesn't it? We open our mouths, words come out, and we can reflect on what we've said and learn how to really polish and refine both our honesty and also the skillfulness of our speech in other ways. So the other aspects of right speech that the Buddha pointed to avoid coarse speech, speech that might offend others, rough speech, harsh speech, to avoid backbiting. And I think that's a really good one, because we do like to talk about people because we're fascinated by people. We're social beings, aren't we? And so it's not unusual, really, to talk about somebody who's not present. But I think that's a very tricky area. And personally, I like to try and avoid that when possible, because there's always the danger that one might say something about the person who's absent, which they would not feel very happy about if they heard it. And that's, I find, a very helpful standard, is like, if they were here in the room, would I still say that or not? That can be quite a good yardstick for whether or not a speech is veering into the unskillful. But also, of course, there is the aspect of gossip, chit chat. And the Buddha was quite scathing about this. It's something that a lot of us do from time to time. I think there's a very important distinction between idle gossip and chit chat and actually the kind of speech we could call small talk, but which enables a kind of sense of mutual, how to say, sort of safety and welcome, perhaps. You know, like when we all come here tonight and there's a little bit of exchange, and that is really skillful, because it's like, here we are, we've come together, we greet one another, and we kind of, it's like a sort of social lubricant, isn't it? You feel then you can relax, and then you can be quiet. But first, just a few words of greeting. And it's very interesting how actually in many, many suttas, the Buddha spoke in just this way. Many suttas, the introduction is that people came to see the Buddha and there was some polite conversation, and then they sat down. And I find that rather lovely, because this is what we do. And we're very good at it, by and large. But then we can distinguish, I think, between this kind of very skillful coming together, politely greeting, respectfully greeting one another, and then the kind of speech that the Buddha described actually as animal talk, which is a bit shocking. The connotation of animal talk in relation to gossip and chit chat, whatever that means to you. But the connotation is that animal talk, it's just talk that doesn't really get you anywhere. It doesn't really nourish the heart. It doesn't really elevate us in any way. Neither does it pull us down necessarily. it's sort of on the level. It's like treading water. We're not getting anywhere. We're not benefiting particularly. We're not suffering particularly, but we're just wasting time. You could say. And I noticed myself that talking is actually quite tiring. Have you noticed that? Do you feel that? I think talking is quite tiring. And so in fact, to sit and chat about this, that and the other, it's actually quite, it takes energy. And then you don't have that energy for other things that might be more worthwhile. So the Buddha gave a great list of all the sort of topics that are considered to be idle chatter. You have to read it. It's a long list, and it, talk of kings, talk of politics, talk of wars, actually, talk of upheavals, talk of streets, talk of villages, endless list, long list, I should say, of topics. And I remember the first time I read the list, I thought, well, that's everything I talk about. Absolutely everything I spend my time talking about. Oh no. Noble silence is perhaps the answer. But I don't think it is, actually. I think it's just really behooves us as practitioners to consider how we use speech, and to, really maybe consider what is idle speech and what is skillful speech, and just to see. And it's a kind of encouragement towards, I would say, a lot more listening and a lot less verbalizing, probably, and that's maybe not such a bad thing. So right speech, we have these aspects, the kinds of speech to be avoided. So again, lying in any way, dishonesty, harsh speech, coarse speech, backbiting, and also idle gossip. And thankfully, the Buddha also gave a lot of advice about how to speak skillfully. What is skillful speech? And even how to speak in ways that promote harmony in society. So helpful. And so we can take encouragement from those teachings where he's really saying, let your speech be gentle. Let your speech be kind. It can be imbued with loving kindness. And what a great gift that is to others. Honest, of course, beneficial. He never suggested that we speak in a way that's unbeneficial. So that's a very clear guideline. And sometimes, he said, in a number of suttas, sometimes we may feel there's something beneficial to be said, and yet we may feel that the listener, the one who we're speaking to, or ones who we're speaking to, will not be pleased to hear it. It will not be well received, or it may cause some kind of unpleasant feeling in the listener. So this is maybe talking about feedback, or criticism. We could use the word criticism. If there's something we feel we need to mention to somebody else, that we know they're not going to really want to hear, initially at least. And the Buddha said in such a case, if you're really sure that what you're saying is true, it's correct, it's beneficial, there's value in your expressing this. And if you have a heart of loving kindness, so one needs to have a benevolence, well-wishing toward the other. He said, if we don't have that, then this is not the time to speak in this way. But if all those factors are in place, he then said, we have to pick our time very carefully. so that it's the right time. And the right time, in one sutta, the Buddha explained that the listener needs to be in a comfortable state with a sense of well-being. One needs to make sure that they've had enough to eat and drink, that they're feeling fine. And that will be the time to choose. So great patience and great skill in actually determining, when is the right time to speak, if we have any sense that it may not be easy for the other to hear what we're saying, and if we're really sure that it's worth saying. So all this kind of skillful advice is there for us. The Buddha also mentioned, I'll just to say to finish, some small points like it's really good to speak slowly, not to use speech in a hurried way. He said if you speak in a hurried way, your voice will become hoarse and your body will be stressed, and it will be unfortunate for you. You won't feel comfortable. So that's a really, I think, lovely piece of advice. So practical. Take your time, speak slowly. And we can also, when we speak slowly, we have a time to consider, is this worth saying? Is that worth saying? Should I say it like this, or should I say it like that? Or should I leave it out altogether? Should I just be quiet? Which is often, I find personally, the right option. It's interesting, When I really pay attention to what I'm saying, I'm much quieter as a person. And one other thing the Buddha suggested was, wherever we are, use the local language, the local idioms, the local ways of speech, not to hold on to our way of speaking wherever we are. And I find that quite helpful. I'm learning Canadian. It's a little bit different from British, it's really interesting. So you just to learn. But of course, when we travel, go to different cultures, different places, to really, we do, don't we? We pay attention, and we really we can notice that there are different ways, cultural expressions, and we kind of want to fall in line so that we can harmonize with those people wherever we are. So those are a few words on speaking, and some advice from the Buddha. And there's a lot in the suttas, in the Pali Canon, on speech, on right speech. And, you can just look up in the index of any of the tomes and see lots and lots of references. So some wonderful advice. There's more. But I think I'll stop here because time's running out. And, we can try we'll try the mic. We're trying to use this mic to see if what the people in the room say can be heard by the people online. And if the people online speak, that the people in the room can hear what's being said. Let's see if it works.
Andamayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karam Gadamase Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu.
Thank you. So if anyone has, any questions, comments, anything you'd like to add, please feel free.
Could you just say a few words about the Buddha's feedback to the group of monks who have been in utter silence during a retreat period and haven't spoken to one another, and he admonished them?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because in a number of places in the suttas, the Buddha advised us to, if we can't speak skillfully, if we're not sure if what we say is right speech, better to practice noble silence, and which is really helpful advice. But also there's a story in the Vinaya Pitaka about a group of monks who decided to practice noble silence. And they had a Vasa retreat, 3-month retreat. And so they didn't speak at all for 3 months to each other. And they just they had a few signs that they used to communicate practical matters. When it was time to, go to the well and collect some water, they had a sign for that, and they did it and so forth. Very harmonious. They got along just fine for those 3 months, and blended together like milk and water. And they were really pleased with themselves. It went well. It was harmonious, great retreat. And then they went to the Buddha at the end of the Vasa, and they told him all about it, and expecting him to give them a bit of praise, or congratulate them, or at least smile at them, or I don't know, give them a sense that they'd done well. But he didn't. Instead, the Buddha said, "You foolish men," and really chastised them. And he said, "Are you animals or are you human beings?" And I remember reading that actually and feeling quite shocked by this, because I wasn't expecting it either. As you read down, you have certain expectations, what you might hear. Interesting. The Buddha said, "Are you animals or are you human beings? You have the gift of speech, you should use it." So he really admonished them for not speaking. And there are quite a few places in the suttas where you get the impression that the Sangha, the monastic Sangha, would meet regularly, and particularly on the moon days, the full moon, new moon, half moon days, the Apposita days, they have to meet anyway. We have to meet. We meet online nowadays, since the pandemic. So I meet with a whole group of bhikkhunis online on the moon day, and we have some conversation and teachings. And so the Buddha was really saying, you need to meet often, you need to talk. And so the monastics would meet and talk on Dharma together. And presumably, if there were any issues and problems, they would be able to be discussed. So, yeah, that's a really interesting teaching, isn't it? A good point. Thank you for raising that and bringing that into the meeting. Anybody else? Any questions, comments? We've got about 10 more minutes. Okay. Okay, we'll say Lynn and then Marilyn. Go ahead, Lynn.
After what you just said, I wonder, because I know we often do silent meditation retreat and it's a big thing. Is that part of the teaching, or are we supposed to be talking during a retreat? Like, I'm just asking this question.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really good question and good point, because it's true, isn't it? Nowadays, we have retreats and we're silent for most of the day, and maybe even the retreats can go on for months sometimes. The Goenka retreats now, they have 90-day retreats, 3-month retreats, and the encouragement is not to speak. It's interesting, yeah. I must say, just personally, I noticed before I was a nun, I loved doing silent retreats, and I was a bit addicted to silent retreats actually, and I went on lots of them. But when I became a monastic, I couldn't do that, and I felt sometimes this is really tough. I'm not getting retreat time. Actually, we do have retreat time as monastics. It's very possible to be living in a very quiet way. But nevertheless, there are still meetings, and it's simply not possible not to speak, because we're alms mendicants, so if I want to eat, I'm going to have to relate to human beings, because otherwise, you can't just, it's very difficult not to speak at all and be dependent on others for everything that you need for your body, for your life. And so I think we can maybe take note that this is the kind of arrangement that the Buddha set out between the monks, nuns, and the lay folk. It's a relationship. It's a living relationship, and it's ongoing day by day. And so maybe possibly we can perhaps enjoy some retreats from time to time, but recognize that our day-to-day practice, day-to-day life, regular life is actually the real field of practice. And this is where we need to apply all the teachings and apply our mindfulness and meditate, meditate on a daily basis, make it possible, find time, but not necessarily to try and get right away from our lives, our everyday lives, into some special conditions in order to practice. It's an interesting question, isn't it? But yeah, they didn't seem to have silent retreats in the time of the Buddha. We can tell from that teaching that that really wasn't considered to be the right way to practice. Marilyn, over to you.
Hello. As a lay person, we can work on ourselves to be kind and patient and have compassion, but we can't control what others are saying to us. And if we're in a family or in a work situation, you can't control what someone is saying to you. And I was told once how important it was for me to surround myself by people who are like-minded. So I'm, in that sense, on this path. But and I'm told that sometimes these people, they're speaking not mindfully or gossiping, and that's not the type of conversations you want to be involved with anymore, that these people will eventually fall away. So that I found a little disturbing, because I have some relationships with people for over 40 years, and I'm godmothers to their children, but they aren't interested in my practice. And I don't want to lose them by talking about my way of speaking. But I don't know how to avoid those situations, to not be pulled into the type of conversation that, like you were saying, small speech or the gossip, and then stepping away and then losing those people from your lives.
Thank you. Yeah, that's such a good. I'm sure that probably many of us can relate to what you're saying, and yeah, how to work within really long-term relationships where there are issues, there are difficulties around right speech, and it's challenging. I mean, for me, I think right speech is really like oftentimes noticing the mistakes after they've been made, and making kind of determinations to try and note when one falls into, say, gossipy speech. But we want to relate to others, and we want to keep relationships going. And sometimes one can feel that this is asking us to compromise in some way on what we feel to be actually good for us and wholesome. And I don't think there's any easy answers, right? But I do feel that we can again and again just remind ourselves of the precepts, remind ourselves of what is skillful speech, and notice the effect on the heart if we feel that we're falling short, and not to make it like we're a terrible person or anything like that, but just, oh, how can I try to avoid falling into that trap again, that habit, one thing for sure, I think we can really be aware that as people who are practicing to develop ourselves, to better ourselves, to live more and more wholesome lives and to free our hearts from suffering, we're likely to have quite a good influence on others, and let that be a source of strength. Worth standing firm, as it were, and really stepping back from habits that don't feel comfortable, don't feel skillful. And so, as I said before, I think oftentimes with in conversation, if we're really mindful, we'll tend to be fairly quiet, and maybe one can develop the listening skills, because after all, that's how we learn. We can learn a lot that way, and people love to be heard. And as people who practice mindfulness, we can really listen. I mean, we can be really good at listening deeply. Listen with your whole body, listen with every fiber of your being. There doesn't need to be anything else going on for us, because one can meditate. We're used to that. We're used to being quiet within. And that's a rare thing in the world. So what actually tends to happen is that other people want to. It's like an energy exchange. It's like if there's a bit of space here, then other people can be very full to bursting with all sorts of issues. And it will be a very natural thing if we just quietly sit and we're present and we don't have an agenda here, then others can really release, and this can be extremely valuable. So listening is something to really cultivate, I think, and it's healing, it's helpful, it's very kind to really hear others, to really listen to others. It's very loving. So I would say when conversations are going on, it feels awkward, can we allow ourselves to step back a little bit and be very quiet and see what comes, I don't know if that's helpful, Marilyn, honestly, but that's just what comes to mind.
It's helpful to listen to you say that, and I can feel it in my heart, but when I'm in that situation, sometimes it's a lot more difficult. But I thank you for your teaching. Thank you.
Yeah, I really hear you. I mean, there's no easy answer, that's for sure. And, I think for each of us, it's really like, there'll be many strategies, many, ways in which we'll be guided. But let's all be guided by the precepts. At the end of the day, this is our joy, this is our happiness. And thank goodness we have that guidance. So we have some sense of how to relate, I really wish you well with it, Marilyn, and all of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So thank you, everybody. It's just after 9. Do we have time for one more question? If it's a quick one, Danica, go for it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for that talk. One thing really helps me sometimes. That's from Ajahn Sona. He says, if we have the good intention, then we would talk right. So having the good intention. So I find if I talk something without good intention, then later I regret for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really nice and clear. I mean, yeah, actually, we can also really focus on our intention, because that doesn't always mean that the speech comes out in just exactly the way we would like. But if our intention is harmlessness, if our intention is to only use speech that's beneficial, and to avoid any kind of unskillful speech, chances are we're going to manage to do that better than if we didn't set our intention. So that's a really helpful teaching. And intentionality is powerful, for sure. So to keep that in mind, and maybe to, you know, yes, slow down, and to have that in our hearts. You know, this is really what matters more than anything else in this conversation, is that I can offer something that's beneficial and avoid any kind of unskillful speech. Yeah, thank you. I'm afraid we should stop now. So I think let's just have a couple of minutes of meditation, and then we can say our goodbyes. I'll ring the gong in a couple of minutes. Let's sit quietly together.